But let me just interject a little economy here, if I may. When 52% of the British electorate voted to withdraw the United Kingdom from the Schengen Agreement, I think it's called, from that part of the European Union that allowed unlimited movement of people across borders within the European Union. They said, we don't want a situation anymore where, and quite literally, I mean, this was happening hugely, where the ad campaign back, against joining the EU back 20, 30 years ago, something like that, was called the Polish plumber ad. And basically what it was, in the UK, plumbers, like in the United States, I mean, plumbing is generally considered, particularly in the States, the licensed plumbers, or where you have unionized plumbers, is considered a profession. It's considered a pretty good job. There's a high level of skill and experience and competence necessary, and if a plumbing job isn't done right, it can lead to disasters. And so, those high levels of skill and competence exist in Poland just like they do in the UK, but in Poland, the pay scale is about half what it is in the UK. So a UK plumber who might normally charge the UK equivalent of, say, $30 or $40 an hour, who's very competent, could be replaced by a plumber from Poland who would do the same job for $10 or $20 an hour. And be very happy with that pay because, if he goes back to Poland after a couple of years, that's big bucks. Or sends money home, live frugally in the UK. And a lot of people in the United Kingdom believed that this proliferation of particularly low-wage, low-end jobs, but also it was happening all the way up to, the boardrooms, that this proliferation of European labor was driving down their wages and hurting their economy. And so they voted to say, enough, we're going to back out of this. And everybody, including the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, predicted that the Brexit vote was going to break the back of the United Kingdom. It was going to destroy the United Kingdom. Just like they predict that if we pull out of the WTO, or if we pull out of NAFTA, or if we don't pass TPP, or if we pull out of the Korean Free Trade Agreement, or the Colombian Free Trade Agreement, or the Panama Free Trade, if we do any of those things, it's going to be a disaster. Piece of the New York Times about this just yesterday, about how integrated we are with Mexico and Canada's economies because of NAFTA. And boy, oh boy, if we were to walk away from NAFTA, this has been it's 20 years that we've been building this integration of our economies. If we walk away from NAFTA, it'll be a disaster. I completely disagree, as you well know. And now this interesting story, this is in The Guardian this morning. It was just published. Of all the G7 economies, now these are the 7 biggest economies in the world, which would be Germany, France, Britain, the United States, China, and I'm not sure who else, might be Russia in there. But of the G7 countries, the International Monetary, I'll just quote you. This is Larry Elliott in Washington reporting in The Guardian this morning. The International Monetary Fund has predicted the UK will be the fastest growing of the G7 leading industrial countries this year, and accepted that its prediction of a post-Brexit vote financial crash has proved overly pessimistic. Well, that's being charitable. How about wrong? Anyhow, the Washington-based IMF said Britain would comfortably avoid recession with growth of 1.8% in 2016. Meanwhile, quantitative easing purchases near record highs even as doubt grows. Now, our Fed has stopped doing QE. They stopped doing it in 2014, as I recall, or maybe early last year. But it's in the last year and a half or so that. And what quantitative easing is when the central banks go out in the marketplace and buy bonds, or I mean, in some cases, actually buy poisonous stuff, which was the toxic acid, the TARP program. Have the Fed buy the crud, the stuff that had been cobbled together by banksters to sell to pension funds and people like you and me for retirement as a great investment, when in fact they knew that it was well, Carl Levin, over and over again was using the S word on TV, a blankety investment. And, they know this stuff is crap, right? They know it's terrible. And so, the central banks bought it to get it off the balance sheet of the banks so that the banks would look healthier. And, we bought up trillions of dollars of bad bank. Basically, this is a giant subsidy and bailout for the banksters. People like John Stumpf, the guy, who runs Wells Fargo, who's being grilled by the House and Senate in the last couple of weeks. But quantitative easing goes beyond that. It's not just the toxic asset relief program. Quantitative easing is where they're basically pulling these bonds out of the marketplace and sitting on them to drive up demand for other bonds so that, corporations that are issuing bonds, that are issuing debt, will find people who want to buy them because other kinds of debt are not available. And it's supposed to stimulate the economy. So here, this is in today's Financial Times. It's a piece by Elaine Moore. QE purchases near record, even as doubts grow. And again, this is not the U.S. central bank, but we're talking about the European Central Bank, the Japanese Central Bank, and I believe the British, and the British Central Bank. Central banks are embarking on the largest quarterly purchase of assets since quantitative easing was introduced following the financial crisis. Now, why would they be doing that? Because they're scared. This is Stephen Major, the global head of fixed income research at HSBC. HSBC is the big international bank that, some years ago was busted for laundering drug money and terrorist money, but apparently has cleaned up their act. And he says it is now nearly a decade since the financial crisis, and this time central banks have amassed huge balance sheets through quantitative easing, and there is, as of yet, no end in sight. He said all the evidence suggests a long, drawn-out process of deleverage. We should be thinking in terms of decades, not single years. And then the article notes, while the U.S. concluded its QE operations in 2014, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, and the European Central Bank are still expanding, pushing the collective balance sheets of G4 central banks to more than $13 trillion. Citibank estimates that the collective balance sheets of central banks is now equal to 40% of global GDP. Now, when 40% of the entire planet's gross domestic product has been acquired by a half a dozen central banks, you know that something's badly out of balance. Something is badly out of control. And in large part, it's because the Europeans, the Brits, and the Americans, since the 1980s, all bought into what's called neoliberalism, this kind of pro-corporate, supply-side economic model, and an austerity-based model. Let's reduce the amount of democratic socialism. Let's raise the amount of raw capitalism. Let's subsidize the banks. And so we've got this. They refer to it as the risky trinity of high debt, low productivity growth, and dwindling firepower by the world's central banks. And they're calling on governments to stimulate the economy. In other words, do what Franklin Roosevelt did. Do what Dwight Eisenhower did. Do what Winston Churchill did. No, we can't do that. We can't do that. Are you kidding? Spend government money? That's democratic society. We can't do that. So are we coming to the end of the bubble? Well, here's another piece in today's Financial Times. The headline, Global Property Investment Falls for the First Time in 7 Years. And this is by Judith Evans in today's FT. Roughly $919 billion was committed to property globally at the end of in the year to the end of June, 5.7% below the total a year earlier, according to Cushman & Wakefield, a property advisor. The reversal after years of rising investment levels marks a late stage of the property cycle, said David Hutchings, head of European investment strategy at Cushman. The decline in investment volumes was spread across regions and sectors, Mr. Hutchings said. Mr. Hutchings said that while the real estate cycle has clearly reached a late stage, it will take longer for the cycle to pass through this time around. In other words, don't expect a housing crash to happen over the course of a few weeks or a few months. It might take a year. But the bubble is about to burst, as at least some folks are suggesting. I'm suggesting, I wrote a book about this, the crash of 2016, and I'm not trying to, I don't want to be right about that. But the structural stuff has never been repaired. The structural damage that was done to the world economy by neoliberal economic policies, both in the UK, in the Eurozone, and in the United States, none of that, or very little of that, has been fixed. Certainly very little in the United States.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, are we going to fix it? Well, the Republicans won't have anything to do with it. Bring back Glass-Steagall? Oh, no way. We can't do that. So hang on tight.